An ordinary cop decided to humiliate and strangle Ronda Rousey's sick husband right on the street. But he didn't even know who would come after him and how it would all end. Subscribe and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of their Santa Monica home, touching the wooden floors with gentle warmth as the quiet hour stretched across the rooms. The scent of fresh coffee blended with the crisp ocean air sneaking in through the slightly cracked patio door, and the low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the space. Rhonda moved across the kitchen in soft athletic pants and a fitted tank, her hair tied back, the toned muscles in her arms shifting with each movement as she rinsed berries in a colander. Her mind was already organizing the day. A run on the beach, a few hours in the home gym, emails about the youth judo programs she had been supporting, meal prep for the week, and the soft, constant awareness of her husband across the hall. She checked the time on her phone, but then lifted her eyes, pausing to watch Travis sitting in the armchair by the window. His large frame barely fit into the chair, shoulders hunched forward slightly, a blanket folded over his knees. His once imposing build had softened, though the ghost of strength was still there in the shape of his hands resting on his thighs, the thick wrists, the broadness of his chest under a loose gray t-shirt. But the way he moved, the way he inhaled and shifted to adjust his weight, told the story of years of fights, hard training, a knee that never fully recovered, and a spine that punished him every morning for every round he had ever fought. He looked out the window, the early light touching the lines near his eyes, his brown hair tied back, a few streaks of gray catching the glow. His breathing was calm but occasionally caught. A small pause before he exhaled as pain shifted through his lower back like a hot wire. His hand rested on the handle of his black carbon fiber cane, the one he sometimes pretended he didn't need, but it never left his side. It was a reminder, a silent witness to the battles that had made him a champion once, and the cost he continued to pay each day. Rhonda finished rinsing the berries and placed them in a bowl, adding a handful of almonds, setting it on the table near him without a word. She didn't need to say anything. She had learned how to move around him, how to read the small winces, how to hear the small cracks in his breathing when the pain was worse. She would see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand tightened around the cane, and she would give him space, or offer a hand, depending on the moment. Travis turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers, and they shared a brief smile. It was soft, tired, but real. She pulled a chair out and sat across from him, sipping her coffee, their silence comfortable. The air between them held the weight of years spent fighting side by side, of understanding that strength did not always look like raised fists, that courage could be found in trying to stand each morning. After a few moments, Travis spoke, his voice low but steady. He wanted to go to the store, just to pick up a few things. She glanced at the small list she had made on the counter: fruit, eggs, milk, a few herbs for dinner, and hesitated. She saw how his shoulders pulled back, how he tried to straighten his spine, the quiet insistence in his eyes. It wasn't about the groceries. It was about proving to himself that he could still do something, still be useful, still be a man who could bring something back home for her. Rhonda nodded. She rose, moving to him, adjusting the collar of his shirt, brushing a speck of dust from his shoulder, letting her hand rest there a second longer than necessary. They didn't speak. She helped him to his feet, her hands strong but gentle under his elbow, steadying him as he shifted his weight to the cane. His jaw clenched as the pain struck, but he drew in a slow breath, let it out, and took a step. The hallway seemed longer than it was as Travis walked toward the door, each step measured, the cane tapping lightly on the wooden floor, a sound that echoed through the quiet house. Rhonda walked a few steps behind, watching, ready but respecting the small independence he was claiming for himself. He reached the entryway, pausing to adjust the grip on the cane, then checked the pocket of his sweatpants for his wallet, his keys. He gave her a look, and she gave him a nod, nothing more. A silent confirmation that he could do this. Outside, the morning was bright, the street calm, the scent of the ocean blending with the smell of cut grass from the neighbor's yard. Travis walked slowly toward his car, an older SUV that he still loved, every step deliberate. His knee twinged with every lift, and the lower back pain was a constant pulse beneath his skin, but he kept moving. As he opened the driver's side door, he paused, bracing himself, and lowered into the seat carefully, exhaling slowly once he settled. He started the car, the engine a comforting rumble beneath him, and for a moment he allowed himself a small smile. The street rolled past him as he drove to the corner store, the sidewalks lined with the palm trees swaying lightly in the breeze. The familiar neighborhood felt comforting, the quiet repetition of streets he had driven countless times before. When he arrived, he parked close to the entrance, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, steadying himself before he opened the door. His reflection in the window showed the man he had become, still large, still there, but softened, slower, marked by time. He took the cane in his right hand, the paper list in his left, and stood, closing the door with a quiet click. The store smelled like coffee and fresh bread, the narrow aisles lined with colorful fruits and vegetables, the small hum of the refrigerators a soft background noise. Travis moved carefully, picking up apples, checking them for bruises, placing them in a small handbasket with deliberate precision. He added eggs, a carton of milk, a small bunch of fresh cilantro, the cane tapping lightly with each step. The cashier greeted him warmly, recognizing him, the quiet respect in the nod they shared requiring no words. As Travis paid for the groceries, he felt a small warmth in his chest, a sense of accomplishment, as small as it was. He could still do this. He could still bring something home to Rhonda, still carry something in his hands that was useful, something that reminded him of who he used to be, who he still was, despite everything. He stepped out of the store, the paper bag in one hand, the cane in the other, taking a slow, steady breath of the sea-kissed air. The morning was still bright, the world still moving, and for a moment, as he turned toward his car, he felt like he could keep moving with it, one careful step at a time. And he did not know, as he took that slow walk across the parking lot, that someone else was watching, sitting bored in a patrol car nearby. Someone who saw the slow steps, the cane, the careful movements, and saw weakness where there was courage, saw a target where there was simply a man trying to live with dignity. But Travis kept walking, the paper bag rustling softly in the breeze, the cane tapping, unaware that this morning, meant to be an ordinary moment of independence, would become the day that would test him in a way he could not fight alone. And at home, Rhonda checked her phone again, glanced out the window, and felt something cold run through her chest, though she could not yet name it. She would soon enough. The breeze was soft against Travis's face as he stepped carefully across the parking lot, the scent of freshly baked bread still clinging to the paper bag in his left hand. The cane tapped against the warm asphalt, a rhythmic reminder of each step's deliberate effort, and he kept his gaze forward, focusing on the calm morning light spilling across the rows of parked cars. It was quiet the way he liked it, the way it had to be now. A small breeze caught the edges of the paper bag, rustling softly, reminding him of the small, ordinary victory he had claimed by coming here on his own. Across the lot, the black and white of a police cruiser was parked at an angle, engine idling, windows down, the radio murmuring softly. Inside, Officer Kyle Stetson, young, broad-shouldered, his buzz-cut hair sharp against the morning sun, drummed his fingers on the wheel, eyes scanning the lot with restless boredom. His morning had been slow, filled with half-written reports, an ignored call from his supervisor reminding him to submit his body cam footage, and a rising itch under his skin that he couldn't shake. His gaze landed on the tall man moving with painful slowness across the parking lot, a cane in one hand, a bag in the other. Weak, Stetson thought, the word sliding into his mind like a hook. He tilted his head, squinting at the man's face, the large frame that seemed diminished by the slow, deliberate movements, the way he paused every few steps to adjust his grip on the cane. Easy. Stetson's lips curled into a small, almost invisible smirk as he shifted the cruiser into gear, rolling forward quietly, the tires crunching on small pebbles, closing the distance between them. Travis was almost to his car, fumbling with the keys in his pocket, shifting the cane under his arm to free his hand, when he felt the presence behind him. A small shadow fell across the ground, the engine's hum suddenly louder, and Travis turned slightly, his heart giving a small, cautious thump. The cruiser stopped, door creaking as Stetson stepped out, his boots heavy on the asphalt, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The badge on his chest glinted under the sun, the radio on his shoulder crackling briefly before falling silent. Travis felt the air shift, the quiet of the morning replaced by a subtle, suffocating tension as Stetson approached, each step unhurried, the weight of authority and unchecked power rolling off him like heat. Travis straightened as much as he could, his hand gripping the cane, trying to steady himself, the pain in his knee flaring with the sudden stop. Stetson's gaze traveled over him slowly, taking in the worn sweats, the scuffed sneakers, the tremor in his hand as he tried to hold the grocery bag steady. "Problem," Travis managed, his voice even, though it carried the soft gravel of someone who had taken too many hits in life, someone who had learned to speak softly to avoid unnecessary conflict. Stetson tilted his head, letting the silence stretch, the corners of his mouth twitching into something close to amusement. He stepped closer, invading Travis's space, close enough that Travis could see his reflection in the mirrored sunglasses, the slight sweat at his hairline, the tension in the man's jaw that didn't match his smirk. "Yeah, I think there might be," Stetson finally said, his voice casual, too casual, as he nodded toward the bag in Travis's hand. "Mind showing me what you've got there?" Travis's grip tightened around the bag, the paper crinkling under his fingers. The cane shifted, tapping lightly as he adjusted his weight, the dull throb in his back reminding him of his limits. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Just groceries," he replied, lifting the bag slightly, the milk bottle inside shifting, the apples rolling gently against each other. Stetson's hand shot out, fingers closing around the top of the bag, yanking it out of Travis's grip with a sharp tug that sent a lightning bolt of pain through Travis's shoulder. The bag ripped at the seam, the contents spilling onto the ground, the milk bottle hitting the asphalt and rolling, stopping near the curb. Apples scattered, one splitting open, the sweet scent of fruit mixing with the sharp sting of humiliation. Travis's heart kicked against his ribs as he bent, slowly, painfully, to reach for an apple near his foot. But Stetson's boot moved, pinning it, grinding it into the ground with a slow twist. The officer's eyes, hidden behind the glasses, remained locked on Travis, the silence heavy around them as the sound of crushing fruit echoed unnaturally loud in the empty lot. "You think you're funny?" Stetson's voice was soft, almost friendly, but the air around him was sharp, dangerous. "Walking around here like you own the place?" Travis straightened, the movement pulling at the scar tissue in his lower back, the cane nearly slipping from his grasp as he caught his breath. His pulse roared in his ears, but he kept his face calm, neutral. The years of fighting, of being stared down by opponents in cages and rings, teaching him to control the panic that threatened to rise. "I'm just going home," Travis said, the words careful, measured. Stetson's jaw twitched, and he stepped forward, closing the last bit of space between them, his chest nearly brushing against Travis's, the scent of sweat and cheap cologne mingling with the scent of the crushed apple. The officer's hand came up, pressing against Travis's chest, shoving him back a step, another, until his spine hit the cold surface of the store's brick wall. The impact sent a shock of pain through his back, forcing a hiss from between his teeth as he tried to adjust, to brace himself. But Stetson's hand pressed harder, flattening him against the wall. "Don't push me," Travis managed, his voice cracking, the words raw, unsteady, the cane clattering to the ground as his hand shot out to grab Stetson's wrist. But his grip was weak, his fingers trembling as they closed around the hard muscle of the officer's forearm. And that was all the invitation Stetson needed. His other hand came up, wrapping around Travis's throat, the thumb pressing against the pulse point, the fingers curling around the side of his neck with practiced pressure. Travis's eyes widened, the world narrowing into the dark lenses hiding Stetson's eyes, the feeling of the rough wall against his back, the heat of the hand around his throat cutting off the air, making the morning sunlight suddenly too bright, too sharp. The world around them seemed to stop, the few people in the lot freezing, a woman pushing a stroller halting in her tracks, a man near the entrance of the store pulling out his phone, but not stepping closer, his eyes darting between the badge on Stetson's chest and the large man pinned against the wall, gasping, struggling, the paper bag torn and forgotten on the ground. Travis's hand clawed at Stetson's wrist, trying to pry the fingers away, but the strength wasn't there. His legs kicking weakly as the air left his lungs, the edges of his vision darkening as the pain in his back and knee became nothing compared to the burning need to breathe. Memories of cages, of fists, of roars of crowds flickered in his mind, but those were worlds away now, worlds where he could fight, where he could win. Here, now, in this parking lot, pinned against the wall with a hand crushing his windpipe, there was no fight, only the slow, humiliating struggle for a breath. A small sound escaped his throat, something between a gasp and a groan, his hand falling away from Stetson's wrist, fingers twitching uselessly at his side. His eyes, wide and desperate, reflected in the officer's glasses, saw his own fear, the realization that he was helpless, that he couldn't save himself, that he couldn't. And as the darkness crawled inward, as the sound of the world became a muffled, distorted hum, Travis's mind flashed, unbidden, to Rhonda's face, to the way she looked at him that morning, the way she adjusted his collar, the warmth in her eyes. The shame was worse than the fear, worse than the pain, the knowledge that he would fail her, that he was too weak to stop this. But before the darkness could swallow him, before the last breath could leave, before the world could slip away completely, the roar of an engine tore through the silence, the squeal of tires biting into asphalt, and in that moment, as Stetson's grip tightened for the final time, Travis's eyes rolled, catching the blur of a vehicle skidding to a stop, a door slamming, footsteps pounding against the ground with a rhythm he knew, a presence he felt before he could see. And Stetson, oblivious, leaning in with the heat of violence in his blood, had no idea what was coming. The screech of tires was a violent tear across the morning calm, a sound that cut through the haze gathering at the edges of Travis's vision as the last of the air fought to leave his lungs. The sun caught on the black SUV as it skidded to a stop, the tires grinding against the parking lot's uneven asphalt, the engine still rumbling in the sudden silence that followed. For a moment, the world paused, the air thick, the scent of crushed apple and hot pavement mingling in the heat that pressed down from above. The driver's door flew open, the slam of it echoing, sharp and final. The sound of footsteps followed, fast, heavy, determined, the stride of someone who did not hesitate, who did not second-guess, who had made a decision and was already acting on it before the rest of the world could catch up. Ronda Rousey moved like a storm across the pavement, her shadow stretching long and dark across the scattered groceries and the fallen cane, her eyes locked on the sight ahead of her. Travis, pinned against the rough brick wall, his feet dragging, the toes of his shoes scraping against the ground as he fought for air. The officer's hand around his throat was the only thing holding him upright, the man's other hand pressing against Travis's chest, keeping him against the wall like a trophy, like a warning, like a promise of what happens when power goes unchecked. The scene burned itself into Rhonda's vision, the angles sharp, the colors too bright, the world too loud and too quiet at the same time. Her breath caught for a single controlled moment, the air locking in her chest as she took in the redness creeping up Travis's neck, the desperate clutch of his hands against the officer's wrist, the way his eyes, unfocused and glassy, turned toward her without truly seeing. Rage did not explode in Rhonda. It did not blind her or send her into a frantic, chaotic fury. It settled into her like a cold, clean blade, sliding into place with precision and purpose. Years of training, of fights in rings and cages, of standing toe-to-toe with opponents who wanted to tear her apart, had taught her how to control it, how to let it fuel her without consuming her. She did not shout. She did not warn. She did not pause. She moved. Her feet pounded against the pavement, each step an echo of the promise she had made to herself long before she ever met Travis, the promise that no one would ever be allowed to take what was hers, that no one would ever be allowed to harm what she loved without facing her. The parking lot narrowed, the distance closing with every stride, her eyes locked on the hand around Travis's throat, on the officer's smug, cruel face, on the mirrored sunglasses reflecting nothing of the humanity he was crushing. Rhonda's hand reached out, her fingers wrapping around the officer's wrist, the grip unbreakable, her thumb pressing against the pressure point just above the bone. She wrenched downward with controlled force, pulling the hand away from Travis's neck in a single, fluid motion that made the officer's arm bend in a direction it was never meant to bend. The grip broke. Travis falling forward, gasping, coughing, collapsing to his knees as his hands clutched at his throat, sucking in desperate, ragged breaths of air that burned and saved him all at once. Stetson's head snapped toward Rhonda, confusion and anger flashing across his face, his mouth opening to shout, to threaten, to command. But Rhonda was already there, her body, moving with a grace that belied the violence that was about to follow, her hand releasing his wrist only to strike upward, an open palm catching him under the chin, snapping his head back with a sharp crack. The officer stumbled, his hand fumbling for the radio at his shoulder, for the baton at his belt, for the gun at his hip. Rhonda's eyes flicked down, tracking his movements with deadly calculation. The years of judo and MMA, the hours upon hours of drilling technique, turning every twitch of his muscle into a signal she read before he could act. His hand closed around the grip of his gun, starting to pull it free, but Rhonda's hand shot out, gripping his wrist, twisting, pulling, turning his own momentum against him. The gun clattered to the pavement, sliding across the asphalt, spinning, forgotten. Stetson's eyes widened, panic bleeding into the aggression, his other hand swinging toward her, aiming for her face, her throat, something, anything to push her back. She stepped inside the swing, her body moving like water, flowing around the attack, her foot hooking behind his ankle, her hip slamming into his side. The world tilted for Stetson, the ground rushing up to meet him as Rhonda executed a perfect throw, sending the officer crashing onto the pavement with a heavy, breath-stealing thud that made the onlookers flinch. His breath left him in a grunt, pain exploding in his shoulder, his head bouncing against the ground, stars bursting behind his eyes. He tried to roll, to reach for something, to rise, but Rhonda was already there, her knee pressing into his chest, her hand gripping his wrist, pinning him down with the effortless, terrifying control of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering how to break a body without hesitation. Travis, still on his knees, watched with tears in his eyes, the world spinning around him as he tried to steady his breath. His throat burned, each inhale a stab of fire, but it was the sight of her, of Rhonda, standing over the man who had tried to crush him, that made him weep, silent tears cutting through the dirt and sweat on his face. The crowd had gathered now, pulled by the violence, by the spectacle, by the undeniable force of the moment. Phones were out, cameras blinking red, but Rhonda did not see them, did not care. Her focus was singular, her mind clear. The only thing that mattered was the man on the ground beneath her, the man who had tried to take her husband's breath, his dignity, his safety. Stetson struggled beneath her, trying to push her off, trying to twist free, but Rhonda's grip tightened, her knee pressing harder, her eyes burning into his as she leaned closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear, but sharp enough to cut through the chaos around them. His struggles slowed, fear replacing the anger, his eyes darting around, looking for help, for escape, but finding none. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it ended. Rhonda stood, her movements precise and deliberate, stepping back from the officer who now lay gasping on the pavement, clutching his arm, his face twisted in pain and confusion. She turned to Travis, who was struggling to rise, his hand reaching for the fallen cane, his legs trembling as he tried to pull himself up. She moved to him, her hand wrapping around his forearm, strong and steady, helping him to his feet with a gentleness that belied the violence she had just unleashed. His hand clutched at her arm, his eyes finding hers, the unspoken words between them louder than any scream could have been. "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe." The world around them buzzed with whispers, with the soft clicks of camera phones being lowered, with the rustle of people shifting uneasily, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But for Rhonda and Travis, there was nothing else in that moment, nothing but the feel of her hand on his arm, the steadying weight of her presence, the certainty that no matter how weak he felt, no matter how broken his body had become, she would be there, standing between him and the world, unyielding, unstoppable. Together they turned, the chaos of the parking lot falling away behind them as they took slow, careful steps back toward the SUV, the air around them filled with the heavy, unspoken truth that this was not over, that there would be consequences, that there would be fear and pain and questions to come. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Travis felt the weight of each breath, the harsh burn in his throat reminding him of how close he had come to losing it all in the span of seconds. His hand clutched the cane Rhonda had picked up from the ground, the black carbon shaft now streaked with dust and a thin line of blood where it had been stepped on during the chaos. His legs were weak beneath him, trembling from exhaustion and the fading rush of adrenaline, each step a negotiation between pain and dignity as he leaned into the steadying presence of Rhonda's hand on his arm. They moved together, step by deliberate step, toward the SUV, the scattered groceries crushed on the asphalt, the milk bottle leaking across the ground in a slow, white puddle that spread under the sun. Behind them, Stetson's groans and curses echoed, the officer rolling onto his side, clutching his shoulder with his uninjured arm, his face a contorted mask of humiliation and searing pain. For a single breath, Travis felt shame, seeing the once powerful man he had been reduced to a trembling figure leaning on his wife, while the man who had hurt him lay broken behind them. But as he looked at Rhonda, at the calm, focused determination in her eyes, he understood that this was not weakness. This was survival. This was family. This was the promise she had made without words, the promise that she would protect him when he could not protect himself. Rhonda opened the passenger door, her movements efficient, the tension in her shoulders the only sign of the storm still raging inside her. She supported Travis as he lowered himself into the seat, each inch a struggle, his back flaring in pain, his breath catching as the muscles in his legs spasmed. She adjusted the seatbelt around him, her fingers brushing lightly against his chest, pausing for a fraction of a second as they looked into each other's eyes, the air between them heavy with everything they could not say. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You're safe now." "Thank you." She closed the door softly, her reflection in the window a fleeting image of control and unspoken fury. She circled the front of the SUV, the sun catching on the sweat that glistened on her forehead. Her jaw clenched as she resisted the urge to look back at Stetson, to see the man who had dared to lay his hands on her husband. The engine rumbled to life beneath her hands as she slid into the driver's seat, her fingers gripping the steering wheel, knuckles whitening as she drew in a slow breath, centering herself. As she pulled away from the curb, the tires rolled over an apple, the soft pop and crunch lost beneath the hum of the engine. The SUV moved down the street, the parking lot shrinking in the rearview mirror, the shattered remains of a quiet morning left behind as a reminder of the fragility of peace. They drove in silence, the streets rolling past them, the palm trees swaying gently under the bright blue sky, the world unaware of the violence that had erupted just minutes before. Travis leaned his head against the window, his eyes closing as he focused on the steady rhythm of the road, the way the vibrations of the engine seemed to soothe the tremors in his legs. Rhonda's eyes flicked to him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the handle of the cane resting across his lap. She wanted to reach out, to take his hand, to promise him that it was over, that he was safe, but she knew better. It wasn't over. Not really. The image of Stetson's hand around Travis's throat burned behind her eyes, the way his face had twisted in pleasure as he exerted his power, the way he had believed he could get away with it simply because he wore a badge. She felt the rage simmer in her blood, a cold, focused heat that had driven her to act, to break him down before he could do more damage. But it was not enough. Not yet. They pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of their home a brief balm against the chaos still echoing in their minds. The garage door lifted, the SUV rolling inside, the darkness of the enclosed space wrapping around them like a shield, closing out the world for a moment. Rhonda turned off the engine, the silence that followed pressing in on them, heavy and complete. Travis opened his eyes, turning his head slowly to look at her, the lines around his eyes deeper now, the shadows darker. His lips parted, a breath catching before he spoke, the words soft but clear. "You saved me." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, the weight of what had happened passing between them without the need for words. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, their fingers intertwining, the contact grounding them both. "You don't ever have to face that alone," she whispered, her voice steady, the promise clear. He nodded, swallowing hard, the tears threatening to return, but he blinked them back, focusing on the warmth of her hand, the strength she offered him without question, without judgment. Together, they stayed there, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, the world outside continuing as if nothing had happened. After a moment, Rhonda stepped out, moving around to help him from the car, her arms steady around him as he shifted his weight, the cane finding the ground, his legs trembling but holding. They moved inside, the door closing behind them, the air-conditioned coolness of the house wrapping around them, a thin veneer of normalcy that threatened to crack under the weight of what they had endured. Rhonda guided him to the couch, helping him lower himself, carefully adjusting a pillow behind his back, placing a glass of water within reach. He leaned back, his eyes closing as he drew in slow, steady breaths, each one a battle, each one a victory. She stood for a moment, watching him, the anger and fear warring inside her, the need to protect him clashing with the helplessness of knowing she could not erase what had been done. She moved to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she filled a bowl with ice, the sound of the cubes hitting the ceramic loud in the quiet house. She returned, kneeling beside him, pressing the cold against the bruises forming on his throat, her touch gentle, her eyes never leaving his face. Travis's hand lifted, his fingers brushing against her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear, his touch light but filled with gratitude, with love, with the unspoken words that filled the space between them. They stayed like that, the world outside their windows moving forward, unaware of the battle that had taken place, the quiet war they fought now to reclaim their peace, to remind themselves that they were still here, still together, still standing. But outside, the world continued to turn, and in the darkness of the city's underbelly, Stetson would not forget the humiliation, the pain, the way his authority had been stripped from him by a woman who had moved like a storm, who had left him broken on the ground. His pride would fester into anger, his fear into a desire for revenge, and the battle Rhonda and Travis had thought was over was only beginning. They did not know it yet, but the fight for their safety, for their dignity, for their right to live without fear, was far from finished. And Rhonda, sitting beside Travis as he rested, her hand in his, her eyes on the bruises she could not erase, felt the promise rising within her once more. If the world came for them again, she would be ready. She would always be ready. The morning light was gone, replaced by the softened gold of a late afternoon that spilled through the windows, painting the living room in a warm hush. The silence was different now, no longer the heavy, watchful quiet of fear, but the slow, patient hush that follows a storm, when the air is still thick with what has passed, and every breath feels like a reclaiming of space that was almost lost. Travis sat on the couch, his body propped carefully against a cushion, the cane resting beside him within reach. The bruises on his neck had darkened into deep purples and sickly yellows, each touch of the cold compress bringing a dull, electric sting that radiated along the nerves in his throat and shoulders. His breaths came easier now, though each inhale still caught slightly, a reminder of the hands that had tried to take the air from him. Across from him, Rhonda sat on the floor, her back against the edge of the coffee table, her legs pulled up to her chest, her arms resting across her knees. She had changed out of her training clothes, pulling on a soft black hoodie, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, the marks on her knuckles from the confrontation still visible, small scrapes where skin had broken, thin lines of red against the paleness of her skin. Her hair was down now, strands falling across her face as she leaned her head back against the table. Her eyes closed as she breathed, slowly, deeply, letting the rhythm calm the residual storm that still simmered under her skin. They didn't speak for a long time. The only sounds in the room were the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, and the occasional soft exhale from Travis as he shifted, adjusting the position of the ice against his neck. Outside, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars rolled down the street, neighbors watered their lawns, birds picked through the grass, the ordinary day continuing without pause. But inside, the world was different now. Travis opened his eyes, looking at Rhonda, studying the way her chest rose and fell with each breath, the way her fingers drummed lightly against her knees, the way her jaw tightened and released as thoughts moved behind her closed eyelids. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he felt, but the words were heavy in his chest, tangled with the fear he still felt, with the shame he hadn't yet learned to let go, with the gratitude that filled him so fully it made his throat tighten, despite the pain. Finally, he cleared his throat, wincing at the burn, his voice rough but steady as it broke the quiet. "Thank you." Rhonda's eyes opened, the soft gray-green of them focusing on him immediately, the slight tilt of her head the only sign that she had heard him, that she was listening, that she was there with him fully. He swallowed, shifting the ice against his neck, holding her gaze. "For today," he continued, each word measured, deliberate, "for being there, for not letting me—" His voice trailed off, the words he couldn't say thick in the air between them, "for not letting me die, for not letting me be weak alone, for saving me." Rhonda's lips curved slightly, the softest ghost of a smile that didn't reach her eyes but was there all the same, an acknowledgement, a silent response that told him she understood every word he couldn't finish. She lowered her legs, shifting to sit cross-legged, leaning forward, her elbows resting on her knees as she looked at him. "You don't ever have to thank me for that," she said quietly, her voice calm, steady, filled with the quiet strength that made Travis feel safe even in his most vulnerable moments. "It's what we do. It's who we are." Travis's hand moved, reaching across the space between them, his fingers brushing against hers, hesitant for a moment before she turned her hand, lacing their fingers together, grounding him. The contact was warm, steady, the strength in her grip reassuring, a promise that he was not alone, that he would never be alone, not while she was here. They stayed like that as the light shifted, the golden afternoon fading into the softer hues of dusk, the sky outside turning pink and lavender, the first stars beginning to prick through the fading light. The house felt like a sanctuary now, the walls holding them, protecting them, the air filled with the quiet strength of two people who had faced something dark and come through it together. Eventually, Rhonda stood, her hand still holding his as she helped him to his feet, her grip firm but gentle as she steadied him. Travis rose slowly, the cane finding the ground, his legs trembling but holding, the pain flaring in his back and knee but not enough to stop him. He looked at her, and in that moment, he felt the truth of everything they had built together, the partnership they had forged, the unspoken promise that they would face whatever came next, together. They moved toward the kitchen, Rhonda supporting him as he walked, each step slow but certain, the cane tapping softly against the floor, a rhythm that was becoming familiar, a sound that no longer felt like defeat but like progress, like survival, like reclaiming the life they were building. In the kitchen, Rhonda guided him to a chair, helping him sit before turning to the stove, her movements precise as she prepared something simple for them to eat. The smell of food began to fill the space, warm and comforting, pushing back the memory of the harsh asphalt, the crushing grip on his throat, the cold fear that had wrapped around his chest. Travis watched her, the way she moved, the quiet determination in every action, and he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the food or the heat from the stove. It was the warmth of safety, of love, of knowing that no matter how dark the world outside became, here, in this space, with her, he was safe. When the food was ready, she brought the plates to the table sitting across from him, their eyes meeting over the simple meal. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of cutlery against the plates, the soft hum of the world continuing around them. Each bite was a reclaiming of normalcy, each swallow a reminder that they had survived, that they would continue to survive. After they finished, Rhonda took his hand again, helping him to his feet, guiding him to the bedroom, the day's exhaustion weighing on them both. She helped him sit on the edge of the bed, removing his shoes, adjusting the pillows behind him as he lay back, his body sinking into the mattress with a sigh that was equal parts relief and pain. She sat beside him, one leg tucked under her, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the life that she had fought to protect, the man she loved more fiercely than she could ever say. Travis turned his head, looking at her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but clear, the gratitude and love in them bright even in the dim light of the bedside lamp. "Don't ever let go," he whispered, his voice hoarse, the words raw with everything he felt. Rhonda leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, her eyes closing as she breathed him in, her hand moving to lace their fingers together once more. "Never," she whispered back, the word a promise, a vow, a truth that would not break. Outside, the world would continue to turn, and the challenges would come, the battles would return, the fights for dignity, for safety, for the right to live without fear would continue. But here, in this room, in this quiet moment, they had each other, and that was enough. They were not defeated, they were not broken, they were together, and that was how they would leave the day behind them, with dignity, with love, and with the unyielding promise that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out the other videos on this channel for more stories that will keep you thinking. And if this meant something to you, share this video with someone who needs to see it